Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, leading publishers of books, directories, educational guides and magazines aimed at schools in the UK and beyond. Enjoy the podcast. Good evening, everybody, and welcome along to Teachers Talk Radio this evening, the late show with me, Tom Rogers. This will be available live now via Twitter Spaces. It will also be available as a podcast in the next day or two via Teachers Talk Radio, which you can follow on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you pick up your podcasts. This one will be available in the next sort of 24 to 48 hours. The topic tonight is all around Andrew Tate, his growing influence, what this means, why he has become as influential as he has, particularly amongst young men and boys, and how schools are trying to manage that, what they may want or need to do to manage it. And I've got a number of sort of guests on the panel this evening who are going to help me digest this, analyze it, discuss it, talk about it. I know that the guests will be sort of dipping in and out as we go, but in no particular order. And you can see two of them already speakers. We've got Matt Pinkett, the author of Boys Don't Try, and also English teacher, blogger, podcaster, and general thinker in the area of misogyny and I guess sexism and all those things around those areas, which many people say are prevalent in schools. I've seen many comments in the last few months saying that sexism and misogyny is a huge issue amongst within schools, and I have agreed personally with a lot of those comments. I've seen with my own eyes much of what they describe, perhaps not the specifics of what many people have described, but I've seen. We'll all have our own examples and things that we could say. So just before I bring in the guests, a little bit of an introduction for anybody who doesn't know, and many teachers don't know yet really about Andrew Tate. He's really emerged into the public domain in the last year or two. He's become really prominent. He's an American-British social media personality, businessman, and former professional kickboxer. And following his kickboxing career, he began offering paid courses and memberships through his website. He became a social media influencer. And his biggest thing, I guess, that he's well known for is promoting this, in inverted commas, ultra-masculine, ultra-luxurious, materialistic lifestyle. And he is a self-described misogynist. And Tate's sort of controversial commentary has resulted in his suspension from several social media platforms. In recent times, we know that he was also arrested in Romania, and he remains, as far as I know, under arrest in Romania in Bucharest. Now, Tate still has a real influence amongst boys, and many teachers talk about how they hear boys talking about Andrew Tate. Obviously, not all of them have a positive view of him, but there will be those that do. So my question is, what is it that he's saying that let's identify the problem first and then move on to the other stuff. So I'm going to start with Matt, because I know he's only got a little bit of time. So Matt, do you want to just unmute yourself and say hi, first of all?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. I say see you. Nice to be here.
Yeah. Matt, I've already done a little introduction for you.
Yep.
But I wondered, let's kick this off. What's your view on Andrew Tate? Let's keep it really simple.
I don't think I'm allowed to say it on here. You have to be after 9 p.m.
Don't swear. But I wondered. I mean, let's just kick off in the very outset. You're a teacher, right? You're still in the school. So have you heard about? Has Andrew Tate been talked about in your school or in your?
Of course he has. I mean, in answer to your question, who is Andrew Tate to me? I think he's a groomer. I think he's groomed. I think what he's doing is grooming vulnerable boys or uneducated in a sense, boys and men, to follow his quite toxic brand of masculinity. I think that Tate has been groomed himself. I think, despite the strength and power that he perhaps exudes to many people, in actual fact, he himself is a victim of masculinity, and he's allowed himself to be seduced by a toxic brand of masculinity that treats women and people that aren't heterosexual pretty appallingly. So that's who I think Andrew Tate is. I think he's weak. In answer to have boys, have I heard as a teacher boys having been seduced by his shtick? Then yeah, certainly I have. Do you know what? I think actually it would be quite hard to find a secondary school teacher today who hasn't encountered Tate in some way or form. Certainly, even over the past couple of weeks, it's like with his arrest, his profile has grown. I remember in the summer back in August, we were all worried about it. There were teachers on social media talking about what they needed to do on inset days to educate staff on Tate and who he is. And while he was always there, I think actually in September and October, it wasn't necessarily a problem, but certainly there's been a huge spike. I think it's, national media attention, but certainly the boys that I teach and listening to teachers on Twitter, I think the last couple of weeks since his arrest, his profile has only grown, and more boys are, well, if they're not being seduced by Tate, they're certainly weaponizing his name to cause a stir, and I think it's working.
When we talk about the phrase toxic masculinity,
yeah,
right? Because somebody put a tweet out earlier today, which I thought was quite interesting, and it's sort of, there was a bit of it where I thought, I sort of get where this is coming from. It said, quote, demonizing Andrew Tate won't solve the problem of why many teenage boys idolize Andrew Tate. Boys need good male role models, and in the absence of decent ones, they gravitate towards men like Tate, who at least talk about masculinity in a positive way. That's Lucy Marsh from the Family Education Trust. I'm not saying I agree with that, by the way, particularly the last sentence. The first sentence, though, I sort of, this idea that what is masculinity? What is toxic masculinity? How can we promote, if you like, the idea that being, I don't know, but I'm asking you that question. Okay. You're more of an expert than I am on this. I'm just sort of voicing these ideas.
Firstly, with regards to the male role model issue, the research isn't actually very clear on that. I think this idea that male role models are the savior to the world's problems, or the problems of masculinity, do such a huge injustice to the women in the lives of many of these boys, single mothers that are working their asses off to bring these boys up and make them good men, to the female teachers that are there day in, day out. I really am sceptical of this idea that we need positive male role models as a solution to the problems that of many aspects of masculinity. In answer, what is toxic masculinity? It's a fun question to ask, and people spend a lot of time debating it and criticizing the term, and then start talking about, well, there are different types of masculinity. In essence, I think we all know what toxic masculinity is. Toxic masculinity is a masculinity that thrives on the objectification and subjugation of women. It thrives on aggression. It's a masculinity that is about the suppression of emotions and the kind of putting violence on a pedestal. It's a masculinity that's kind of unabashed in its kind of brazen sexuality and the way it imposes that upon others who have not consented to be exposed to it. It's about competitiveness. I think I've summed it up there.
Yeah. Why do you think then that Andrew Tate and people? I mean, we're singling out Andrew Tate. I mean, there's other. I'm sure there's many other influencers who maybe have similar views or some similar views to him. So we're singling him out because he's probably been in the news the most. But why is it then that young boys, young men, are why are they sort of latching on to him and his messages? What is it about it that's it can't be that all of these boys, all of them, are sort of fundamentally bad
No,
lads.
of course,
Do you know what
of
I mean?
course not.
So there's got to be certain things that he's saying or doing that is appealing to them, or something that they feel disenfranchised over, or something that they feel frustrated. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's frustration in themselves that he's sort of latching onto. I don't know. But there's something there. What is it?
Okay, I think there's three parts to that answer. Firstly, he's powerful, he's rich, and he spends his life in the company of women who Western society would define by Western standards as physically attractive. It's I think any person that wants that power, money, and the company of attractive people, be it physically attractive, be it attractive in personality, I don't think you have to be a villain to want those things. So he presents a lifestyle that has been sold to boys since from day one. He's James Bond, isn't he? He's real life James Bond. Another thing is, I do think he provides an antidote to the very real threat that boys perceive to their masculinity. Masculinity is in a precarious position right now. For years, we have, or us, and by we I mean men and boys, we've had everything we've ever wanted. Even if we're not powerful, we still have more power than women. We get paid more than women. We're allowed to go out at night, and we don't have to hold keys behind between our knuckles as a weapon. We can go out on our own. We can, we get paid more, and all we've had to do to achieve all that is be born with a penis. And all of a sudden, that's a threat. And I do think we're a lot better in education. I do think we're a lot more gender aware. We do, rightly so. I do think we live in a feminist education system now, rightly so. However, the very real facts are that still cartoons, books, films, Netflix shows still present a masculinity that teaches video games, that teaches this old masculinity. I guess it seems at once outdated, but also it is still very much there. And for many of these boys, their dads have had everything they wanted. Their dads think it is their right, that they get paid more, that that it's okay to be violent. Their granddads did. And all of a sudden, and rightly so, the Me Too movement, everyone's invited. Conversations like this are a threat to that. And so you've got the group of boys that don't want that threat. And these are the same type of boys that misunderstand, for example, what feminism is. They encounter feminism on YouTube, which is often radical feminism, which can be quite violent. And they totally don't understand what feminism is. And then you've got another set of boys. You've got another set of boys who are good boys, who are polite, who are chivalrous, whatever that means. They're not sexist. They don't objectify their peers or their teachers or women. but they feel aggrieved at the fact that they're having to take responsibility for the sins of their fathers, their grandfathers, their brothers, and their friends. And so that burning sense of injustice again makes Tate attractive to them. He, why should I don't know, why should I not what why should I cross the road in the middle of the night when a single woman on her own is coming towards me? Why should I do that to make her feel safe? I'm not going to rape her, I'm not going to attack her just because some other man's going to do that. Why should I inconvenience myself? That's not fair. And that kind of attitude means that actually Tate, that turns into resentment, and then again they become almost one of these other sets of boys who are simply drawn to Tate because they feel that they should be stronger than women, and that's what they're entitled to. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, thanks for that answer, Matt. That's yeah. You've covered a lot of bases there. Charlotte, I want to bring Charlotte in. Charlotte is a teacher in Northern Ireland, I believe. And Charlotte, I think you've done more media appearances in the last couple of weeks than your average politician. Do you want to unmute yourself, bottom left? Charlotte?
Is that it?
Hello, yes. Good evening.
Hello, good evening. Yes.
How are you doing? Okay?
Yes, I'm good.
Excellent.
Yeah. That I really enjoyed listening to Matt. Everything that he said was really important to hear. And, just him talking in the end about how boys feel that burning sense of injustice. I think that's I think that's really interesting, and I think there's a lot more to think about around that.
Can I ask you, Charlotte, what are the things that Mr. Tate and other people like Mr. Tate say that are particularly problematic in your view?
I have not really concerned myself too much with Andrew Tate, to be honest. I just see him as the latest in a long line of, people who are saying out loud what a lot of men think, or privately say to each other. So I feel that this week has been an opportunity to raise the issue and to help, parents and teachers think about it. Yeah. But I haven't, I don't watch Andrew Tate on TikTok, and to be honest, the boys that I teach are not sitting in classrooms, imitating him or spouting stuff that he says. No. What they're doing is they're asking me, here, miss, do you like Andrew Tate, and they're saying it with a smile on their face because they're having a bit of a laugh, and they want me to say, oh, he's such a baddie, and let's have an argument. Yeah. But of course I couldn't initially say he's a baddie because I didn't know anything about him, because until September of this year, of the past year, I hadn't heard of him, and the kids had to tell me, a little bit about him, and then I Googled him.
And what did they tell you, Charlotte? What did they tell you?
They told me, first of all, that he was an MMA champion, and that's how he'd made all his money.
Yeah.
So that's how they thought he, rose to fame and made all of his money.
Well, that's probably true initially, at least, I suppose. Before
I don't think he would have made that much money, winning titles.
Well, maybe not compared to now, but I think he was. I mean, he was a world champion, so I think he was doing quite well. But I don't know. I mean, not compared to now, but I mean that's how he.
And to be honest, that's how they presented him to me.
Yeah.
And then I Googled him and I saw that he was hanging around with Tommy Robinson, and I said to the boys, oh, this is a bit of a bad sign. And of course, quite worryingly, the boys said, oh, we like Tommy Robinson. And then that was another whole conversation to have. But I do not have an encyclopedic knowledge of all the things that Andrew Tate has ever said.
Well, let me rephrase the question then. What are the things that people like Andrew Tate say that you think A, are problematic, and B, are appealing to young boys? Because they are appealing to them. So I'm asking you, A, what are these problematic messages or themes or ideas? And B, why are they? I mean, Matt's already sort of answered that, but I wonder what your take on that was as to why they are proving so influential and popular.
Well, I mean, I think that it's possible that boys like Andrew Tate, and they love the fact that he's glamorous and cool and good looking and strong and really powerful, and he has loads of money. I think that they can, really love all that about him and admire all that about him, but not necessarily buy into the misogyny that he spouts. Because the boys that I've spoken to, a lot of them, especially the younger ones, so the 13, 14-year-olds, seem to think that it's all about cars and it's all about money and it's all about him being cool. And they haven't really necessarily picked up on, they haven't fully, digested the other stuff. Whereas maybe the older boys, or the boys who are spending more time on this stuff, are the ones who are taking the misogynistic message to heart. And maybe also they've been teenagers longer. They've had more time to be, sort of ground down by life, and looking for a reason to explain why things aren't so good. So I think the younger boys might be just really fascinated by the cars and the fancy stuff. And the things they say to me was like, "Oh, miss, what color is your Bugatti?" And I mean, I thought they were making fun of me because I cycle to school, and I was like, "Yeah, I've got a pretty ordinary bike." So to me, the boys they're just really wrapped up with the glamour. But also, what I've heard Andrew Tate say in some of the things I've been listening to is that he almost has contempt, like, for his listeners, and he sort of speaks to them about, if you're not rich, it's your fault and you need to fix it. And so there's.
I mean, I don't know enough about him to say this, but is he 100? Is he serious in what he's saying and doing? I don't know enough about him. I know, obviously, I've seen some of the clips in researching this show and whatever else, but some of it's just so ridiculous that you sort of wonder if it's just for almost effect, to get the attention, to get the hits, so to speak. I don't know the answer to that because, well I don't know.
He certainly does. He does look like a cartoon. He sits there in a sort of like a smoking jacket or something, with a cigar, and in a wood paneled room, and it is like something from like a parody. It's a joke. It's sort of, but that's because we're adults and we can see that. Whereas I think kids don't see that as ridiculous. They see that as exciting and glamorous.
Let me ask you, Charlotte, what's your school been doing with the issue of sort of misogyny? I mean, I want to talk about this in education. I mean, how much of an issue do you think sexism is in schools, particularly for teachers who are not male? I mean, how much of an issue do you think this is, and for girls,
Well, I mean, I think it is a significant enough issue to spend a lot of my time campaigning on it and organising conferences every year to challenge it. So, and it manifests itself in various different ways. The problem, the part of the
just
solution.
Losing you slightly, Charlotte, but I'm not sure if that's just me. Maybe my admin can tell me, but I just lost you very slightly there.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Are we back? We're good?
Yeah, you slightly dropped in, but I don't know. It may just be me. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'll bring someone else in, and I'll come back to you in a second and see if that makes any difference. Emily, are you there? You need to click unmute on the bottom there.
Oh, yes, I am. Yep.
Good
Sorry
evening.
about that.
It's okay. How are you doing? Okay.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Yes, thanks for having me.
No, no problem. Thank you very much for giving up your time. You are a senior lecturer in criminology at the University of Surrey, and you do research with young people about sex and relationships.
Yeah.
Now, I wondered what your take on the whole Andrew Tate issue is, because I've been reading comments you made in a recent article where you argued that teachers' sort of well-intentioned attempts to shut down misogynistic conversations can sometimes or often make things worse.
Yeah, and I made that argument in as I was trying to be constructive, recognizing with that yeah, it absolutely is well-meaning, and I think we've got quite a lot of emphasis now, haven't we, in general, on this idea of zero tolerance and creating environments within schools in which, you know, low-level banter and all of that kind of stuff is addressed as a problem rather than just trivialized and ignored or whatever. So I'm not saying that the efforts aren't well-meaning. They certainly are, but I think the problem, in as far as what I'm picking up from boys and observing, is that it's not shutting someone down doesn't resolve any of the underlying beliefs or attitudes, right, that sits underneath the expression of that misogynistic view. Maybe sexism is expressed or something because the person genuinely believes in it, or maybe to impress peers, and we know how boys kind of bounce off of each other and say and do these things to be shocking, and all the rest of it, and to gain inclusion in their peer group. Whatever the kind of motivation is that sits underneath the expression of those ideas, just telling someone, no, you're not allowed to say that. Yeah, I mean, it's not resolving any of the underlying, like, the cause of the expression of that belief. And also it potentially might make things worse if it feeds into a narrative of, oh, you know, we're not allowed to speak, no one's hearing us, we're not allowed, you know, that notion of, you know, we live in this woke time where we police what people are allowed to say, and censorship and all of this, and then people like Andrew Tate can make an argument that, yeah, you know, you're not allowed to hold certain beliefs, you're not allowed to say certain things, and all of this, and so it can kind of antagonize that perception.
I mean, can you give it? I personally, I completely hear what you're saying, and I agree with that. But I was wondering, can you give an example in sort of a classroom context of what that might look like?
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, like I think you said in the intro, most of my research focuses on relationships and sex education and young people's engagement with that, and what it's achieving, and doing observations of lessons around teaching of, you know, complex conversations about porn and consent and that kind of thing, and often what you find is, you know, boys sometimes coming out with statements that aren't always entirely appropriate. For example, I was watching a teacher talk through an example of a situation, a sexual encounter between a boy and a girl, where the boy was being pressured by the girl in the hypothetical scenario, and she was asking the class, right, okay, like, would this be consensual or not consensual or whatever? And this boy shouted out, he said, oh, well, you know, miss, it depends on how fit she is. Like, if she's ugly, then it's definitely rape. And all his mates crack up laughing. And obviously that's a really inappropriate comment, right? And it's inappropriate on so many levels, right? It's misogynistic, but also what that's saying about consent and all of that is, there's a lot of stuff to unpack with a comment like that, right? And I thought, oh, but it's interesting that the guy said that, like, that there are things being expressed there around, like, male victimization, like, loads of assumptions, aren't there? Loads of social norms and all of that being expressed. But the teacher was just like, you can't say that. Absolutely never say anything like that in my classroom again. So conversation was over. There was no unpacking of what had been said, why it had been said, or anything. And then him and all his mates are just laughing with each other about it. So there's no movement forward, right? And then the problem is that, because that teacher, she said to me afterwards, she says, oh, I know the boys get a bit fed up of me. They see me as, like, the feminist teacher that's always banging on about what they are and aren't allowed to say. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, you know, that's the problem, right? Their version of feminism that they're engaging with, or what they're perceiving to be happening in that space, is, yeah, not for me. I'm not allowed to say anything. I'm just getting told off. Yeah, I'm just going to go and laugh with my mates. And Andrew Tate kind of says how it is. And yeah, it's attractive, right? And, you know, and I'm not saying that we tolerate those kind of contributions, but I think we have to do something with them, not just shut them down.
Matt, if you're still there, I'll bring you back in at this point and sort of what your thoughts on that are. Because I personally sort of resonate with a lot of that. I can understand why a teacher who sort of panics and thinks, if I get into this, I've done this in the past, if I get into this with this group, it could turn into carnage, you know, all sorts of comments being thrown around and whatever. But fundamentally, I completely understand what Emily is saying there. That's my
opinion.
I
mean, I totally agree with everything that Dr. Emily said. I think that certainly we need to be having these discussions. However, I think we also need to accept two things. It's not simply as easy as saying we need to have discussions. It's very easy for me as a white heterosexual male that sounds the way I do with a shaved head who watches a bit of football to have these conversations with a group of misogynistic boys. If I'm a 23-year-old ECT teacher in a class full of year 11 boys who are spouting misogyny at me, obviously I'm not, just an example, I can understand. Well, actually, the very fact is I can't possibly begin to imagine. I could imagine that situation could potentially be intimidating. It could be difficult. So I do think we need to help teachers, male and female, think about actually, well, how can we have these discussions? What is a constructive way of having these discussions? And how can we have these discussions not only in a way that educates the boys and, to coin a phrase that Dr. Emily used, moves them forward, but also allows me as the teacher to feel safe and not in any position of vulnerability, really. So I do think we need to think about how we can, I don't know if it's scripts or, we need to do some proper thinking actually about what makes a good discussion and the conditions for good discussion so that all parties involved in the discussion. Because we've got to remember also, when a boy spouts misogyny, you actually feel a very visceral reaction to that. It's if a boy doesn't know how to split an atom, or I don't know how to work out how to balance an equation, that lack of education on his part doesn't anger us, it doesn't upset us. When a boy lacks education in the area of misogyny or feminism, I think understandably it can be upsetting. It can actually be repellent. It can be disgusting what we're hearing. So also we need to, as teachers, figure out ways like, how do we control our emotions there? And I think at times you have to be almost like a saint to be able to do that. So how do we do that? What strategies can we put in place to help us?
Well, let me ask you in a minute, Matt, and I'm going to bring Charlotte back in as well in a second. I know we've got Maggie waiting patiently in the wings as well. I will be talking to Maggie in a bit too. Before I ask you, because in a minute I'll put that scenario to you of basically what Emily has outlined there. A student makes a comment that would I'm sure be deemed unacceptable, and is unacceptable within any context, but it's how you respond to that in class as a teacher, and I'd be interested in putting that sort of scenario to both of you in a moment. Before we do that, it's just to say that this show on Teachers Talk Radio, like all our shows, is brought to you in partnership with John Cat Education. You can see them pinned at the top of this space. If you want to find out more, click that tweet, go into the link there, visit johncatbookshop.com. And explore their latest titles and advance your own professional development today. They've got some brilliant books out at the moment. One example of a book that I've read recently from John Cat, which I thought was very good, was from Bridget Knight on the subject of values and the value of subjects. If you want to check that out, it's available on the website, johncatbookshop.com. But also, John Gibbs, who's a Teachers Talk Radio host, did an interview with Bridget on Friday, which is available on the website. It's well worth a listen. If you're interested in values-based education, character-based education, then that show from Friday is well worth looking up if you want to spend an hour on a podcast from TTR. So, Charlotte, I'll come to you first, then I'll go back to Matt. Charlotte, let's see if your signal's okay now. Charlotte, are you there?
I am. I'm here. Have you got me?
Good. Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, because, I mean, Emily's highlighted a scenario there, which I'm sure has played out hundreds of times in classrooms. And there's a number of different responses that could happen. The one that Emily stated, which I'm sure many teachers take, or or other options. I'm wondering what your response to that would be in the classroom as a teacher.
So when I write a scheme of work on relationships and sex education, the first couple of lessons are about sexism in society. And everything that we learn beyond that, refers back to what we learned in the first two lessons about gender stereotypes and sexism in society. And of course, it is acknowledged at the beginning of the unit that any discussion about relationships and sex education is going to elicit giggles, it's going to elicit nerves, it's going to elicit the desire to have a bit of banter and have a bit of crack around it, and that all of that is healthy and normal and, not to be ashamed of. So once you've kind of established that I expect that from you and that's okay, but there are sort of boundaries within which we will speak, and there's language that we will use, and we're going to lay out those ground rules from the start with compassion and with care and with understanding, then they're laid out, and it kind of sort of diffuses a bit of the desire to speak like that. Because if you as a teacher are saying, I totally acknowledge that this is awkward and you feel a bit funny about talking about all of these things, but that's what we're going to do. And also, if you ground your scheme of work in an exploration of sexism in society, the relationship between sexist attitudes, beliefs and behaviours to sexual violence, and showing that spectrum, and showing that in places where sexist attitudes prevail, women are less safe. And when you kind of, make that clear from the beginning, it sort of takes away maybe that desire for kids to kind of make such a joke out of it. And the other thing I would say is that there's been a lot of focus over the last week or so about, the idea of a teachable moment of, in the middle of your lesson, somebody says something about Andrew Tate and you stop the lesson and deal with it, and all the sort of ways that teachers can do that. But that is no substitute for a curriculum in place to teach children about sexism, and it's no substitute for a culture in a school that addresses sexism, and that's in your policies. So does your school have a sexist language policy? Because I know when I worked in London, in some pretty forward-thinking schools, they had a homophobic language policy or racist language policy, but they didn't have a sexist language policy. It was one of the things that my feminist society asked for. Then look at your playground. What does your playground look like? Is it dominated by boys with balls and girls being pushed to the side? Could girls play any kind of ball sport if they wanted to, or would they be pushed, off the field? How does your school need to say, we are going to redesign how the playground is used so that it is used 50-50 by girls and boys? And then, think about on your corridors, if a boy does grab a girl or make a comment, what is the response? Is it on SIMS? Like, is it on your behavior kind of management system that there is such a thing as a sexist incident and there's sexist behavior? Sexist behavior and language? Is there a chance to have a conversation, with kids about that? So all of these things are about the ethos of the school, about the culture of the school, about the behavior systems in place. And of course, then there's your curriculum. What does your curriculum say about the place of women? Is a history lesson, about, dead white men? I asked kids, recently, and I'm a history teacher, right? So I totally accept responsibility for this. But I said, to one of the groups I was teaching, what women have you learned about in history? And this was at the end of, 3 years of Key Stage 3. And they said, Henry VIII, 6 wives, and the suffragettes. They were the women that they learned about. So, no other women existed in history for these kids in the 3 years in which they had learned about so many men. They'd learned about Martin Luther King, and they'd learned about Gandhi, and, they'd learned about, all the characters in First World War, etc., etc. But there's no women, So if it's not in your curriculum, if your corridors are dominated by boys, if your classroom management is allowing boy voice to dominate, all of these things tell the message to the kids that boys are on top. And
I wondered, I mean, you've mentioned a few really interesting examples there, but what can school leaders do? I mean, what would you want school leaders to do? You mentioned having the policy, you mentioned creating the culture. I mean, what sort of things are going on that are almost slipping under the radar? Are some teachers feeling intimidated by groups of students, stuff like that? What would you want leaders to do?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to do is to talk to your students and ask them questions and get some answers, because you don't know what it's like to be a teenage girl and you don't know what it's like to be a teenage boy, but they do. And, a lot of the time we talk about student voice and it's tokenistic and it's rubbish, right? But actually student voice is really valid when you're asking kids to tell you about their lives. When you're asking them, what is it like to get the bus into school? Is there, do you feel safe on the bus as a girl? Do you get comments about your clothing? I mean, uniform is obviously a big thing that schools can do to think about, making life easier for girls. So talk to the kids, find out what it's like, use surveys, obviously be careful of the questions that you ask and all that. But, even just getting little focus groups, if you want to set up a feminist society or, a gender equality society, call it whatever you want, but an opportunity for kids to kind of work on this as well. I would say definitely having a policy on sexist language and behaviour is important. And, announcing that, maybe, having an assembly to say, we thought it was important to announce this. We want to make sure that, this language is not used. And it's also not used by girls, because girls can do this to other girls. Girls call each other all the terrible names and slut shame each other. And, that makes, that plays into misogyny, just as much as what boys are doing.
Yeah. Okay. I think you've got to go soon, haven't you, Charlotte? I could be right. Yes. I don't want to. Yeah. So I mean,
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Emily, I'll bring you back in just before we sort of move on to chat with Maggie about her school and what she's been doing. You're sort of. I mean, I'm really still sort of interested in what you said here. You said it must not be done in the form of a lecture in class. It should entail calling them in rather than calling them out, which I found rarely leads to anyone changing their view. You've already said that. I mean, what from your experience as a sort of lecturer in senior lecturer in criminology at the University of Surrey, what are the dangers if young boys adopt these attitudes further down the line and sort of really get heavily influenced and set in these views? What are the sort of dangers?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? I say we can't lecture our way out of this problem when I am actually a lecturer. So, yeah, ironic. But yeah, no, and I completely take the point of what everyone said about the actual complexities of kind of critically engaging with this stuff with boys. Yeah, absolutely. We kind of know what we've got to do, but doing it is the challenging part of it. I think, yeah, from a kind of criminological perspective, it's not kind of this straightforward thing in terms of, you express these views and therefore you're going to go out and commit, serious offences against women and all of that. Yes, maybe, absolutely. Most men the men who are committing offences against women endorse sexist and misogynistic perspectives, right? That you can watch it from that angle. However, on the flip side, not every boy who expresses these ideas is necessarily going to go on and engage in those behaviours. No. So we have to be quite measured about that. I think what I'm picking up when I speak to teenage boys about, say, some of the issues around sexual violence is the way in which these narratives really constrain their ability to understand how to have relationships and how to deal with some of the complexities that we know, we're talking about more and more, aren't we? Harmful sexual behavior between young people, problems like coercive control, violence in relationships and so on. The normalization of some of that to the extent that it might not even be recognized as an issue. We're not really making space. I mean, right at the beginning of the conversation, talking about ideas around masculinity and so on, if we're not really offering a way for boys to develop an awareness, a critical awareness of social norms and all of the kind of gendered beliefs that we see in society, but also around emotional literacy. If, Andrew Tate is almost giving voice and a structure to some of what these boys are struggling with, but then also entrenching the problem, right? Because it's offering, I think, one of your other contributors said, it's like a cartoonish form of masculinity that doesn't actually resolve any of the dilemmas that boys face, and actually puts more pressure on them to act up to a particular type of masculinity that probably isn't accessible. So then when they're having relationships with girls or with other boys or whatever, where is the emotional literacy? Where is the emotional intelligence to actually engage in those relationships and have positive relationships and positive experiences, right? When I had a recent research sitting down with boys and talking about consent. Yeah, they could prattle off the law on consent. They knew the definition of that, no problem. They've been taught that. But they knew all the things they were and weren't allowed to do and what they should be doing and not doing. But when it came to navigating the emotional realities of having relationships and having sex and the peer pressures and the social expectations, they had no idea what they were doing. And people like Andrew Tate aren't really giving them an answer. It looks like they are, but it's a simplistic, it's a blunted answer. So yes, of course, there will be boys that go out and they commit awful acts of violence. But I think also underneath that there is some more complex stuff going on that's really constraining the ability of boys to have happy and healthy relationships and happy sort of perspectives on themselves,
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of factors there, isn't there? Obviously, Tate is just one tiny piece.
He's a mirror of this, right?
Oh.
It's like we go on about it. It's like we say, online porn is the cause of all our problems. If only we could get rid of that. If only we could get rid of Andrew Tate. Yeah, okay, but then what? Like, there's something deeper happening here that this is reflecting.
I mean, I was talking earlier with Matt around this idea of masculinity versus toxic masculinity. Do you think, like, what is? I suppose I'm asking you now, Emily. We know what the traits. Matt was excellent in his analysis, in his summary of what toxic masculinity is. Everyone would sort of go, you'd be nodding their heads and say, yeah. I think the bit maybe where, I guess, like, what we've identified there's an issue there. We've said that lots and lots of young boys and men are heading towards people like Tate, not just because of the money and the sexy lifestyle and all that sort of stuff, but this sort of idea of masculinity, this idea of there's something. Is it what Matt said? This sort of like James Bond sort of thing. I don't know, but what is it? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, when I speak to boys about what they find attractive, and it was really interesting to hear the other contributors share their perspective on this, and I'd completely agree with the kind of summaries that were given about what boys are thinking and feeling about these people. And yeah, something I'm picking up on is almost a contradictory like thing going on. So like on the one hand, yeah, it's this idea of like being powerful and dominating, and the money, the cars, the cigars, all this kind of all that stuff that people like Andrew Tate put out there. That almost looks quite comical, actually.
I mean, I think that's material. I think that's
there's a material side
that's
of it.
Driving that.
Yeah, but then there's also this side of boys. I think it was it might have been Matt who said this. There's this idea that when I sit down and speak to boys, where they feel that they are being told that they're doing something wrong. We've got sexual violence in society, we've got this, we've got that, and it's boys' fault, it's men's fault, and they need to change. And some of the boys are thinking, well, we get it. We get that sexual violence is a problem and all of this, but they feel unfairly targeted. And there is this kind of positive vision of masculinity of, no, you don't deserve to be unfairly targeted. And even what I'm picking up from boys is not only do you not deserve to be targeted, but you're actually the ones in danger. I mean, this is a whole separate thing, but the idea of false accusations of rape, so many boys I sit down to want to talk to me about that. And they say, we're the ones in danger. We're the ones whose lives will be ruined by girls. And I say, where do you know that? Like, how do you know that? Does this happen in life? Like to your friends or whatever? And they go, no, it's people online. Like you read these stories about this guy and like this girl accused him of rape and now his life's ruined. And they talk about all this stuff. And they say, that's what feminism does to us. It puts us in prison. Like we might make a mistake and we're going to, our life will be over. And so there's almost this side of masculinity about, it's this positive, albeit toxic form of masculinity that we can celebrate, but also this other narrative of, you're actually the vulnerable ones. And I think what that's tapping into in these boys is ongoing feelings of vulnerability and complexity that they've got about their own inner emotional life that they're not necessarily having space to express, right? Certainly not in their male peer groups.
No.
And not really in these kind of educational settings, right, where it's all just banter and all of that happening in the classroom. So I think the guys are tapping in, some of these influencers or whatever we want to call them, is tapping into that side of it as well, that vulnerability that they feel.
I mean, I asked this earlier to Charlotte, who's actually gone now. So thank you very much, Charlotte. I didn't have a chance to say thanks very much for coming on to Charlotte. I think she had to go, but she was. I asked her earlier what schools should or could do, and Maggie, I'm going to bring Maggie in now. Maggie, can you unmute yourself, please, on the bottom left, if you can? Hello.
Hello.
Good evening. Are you okay?
Good evening. Really interesting listening to everyone contribute.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you want to introduce yourself and your role just quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm head of wellbeing at Wolverhampton Grammar School. We're an independent school, obviously in Wolverhampton. And being head of wellbeing means that I am in effect head of department for PSHE and RSE. And look at that whole school, look at that in terms of guest speakers, lessons, tutor sessions. So that's what I do. And it's been really interesting because we've been doing some work around Andrew Tate specifically, but also around all of the other themes that are linked to him.
Right. Well, I want you to talk us through in detail, if you can, from start to finish, all the work you've been doing. The interventions, the sort of philosophy behind it, that would be really interesting for me and all the listeners, I'm sure.
Okay, I hope you've got quite a while then.
Oh, yeah, we've got ages. Don't worry.
Okay, that's great. So, I really take the point that Dr. Emily made about making that safe space for the students to talk. And that was something that was really important to Wolverhampton Grammar when we embarked upon widening our curriculum so that PSHE had a specialist group of teachers who were trained. There was time on the timetable for lessons. The curriculum was rebuilt and rewritten, obviously to incorporate all of the statutory content that we need to in terms of PSHE and RSE, but also to go beyond the statutory as well. So we have a spiral curriculum that runs from year 7 through to 13, and it incorporates lots of the topics that have been discussed today. So we talk about misogyny, we talk about discrimination, particularly the Equality Act, and what the protected characteristics are and what that will mean to our students, not only in school, but also as they go on to the wider world of work and beyond university and so on. We also have regular conversations about sexism and what that looks like, what our hard line is on what's acceptable, hate speech, and something that hasn't been talked about too much yet this evening, which is online safety. And, because these influencers like Andrew Tate are accessing our children through social media, so to empower them and to understand what it really means if you follow someone, what it really means if you like and share or retweet their content. So within the context of that wider curriculum, and the lessons, we also back that up with guest speakers. I'm a white woman. If I want to have a speaker in, for example, if we want to do some work on racism, I'm not the best person to speak about racism because that's not part of my daily life. So we look at specialists that can come in and speak from a place of experience and therefore relate best to our students. With what's happened with Andrew Tate, this is something that I've been following for quite a while.
Yeah.
And I was cautious not to be reactive to what he was doing and therefore sensationalise him and in some way spark curiosity in the students. And I think, oh, okay, what was that about? Maybe I'm going to go and have a little look at what this guy's about. But I think certainly over recent weeks, over Christmas and so on, when he's been arrested, it's become more and more of an issue. And he's being brought up more and more in lessons. So I teach Key Stage 3 once a week, every week, and we have these wider conversations anyway. So the students often come to me and say, oh, Miss, what did you think about this that I saw in the news? Or what do you think? You know, today I was asked, for example, what I think about the Gender Equality Act in Scotland. And it's giving the children that space to be able to talk about issues that are close to them. So with Andrew Tate, the way I felt and the way that I led on this is that we're talking about hate speech anyway. We're talking about sexism anyway. This isn't anything new to us. And as Dr. Emily said, you know, if Andrew Tate disappears overnight, all of these issues will still exist. However, because the children are talking about it and they needed that space to be able to really find out what's going on and be able to ask those questions in a safe way. And certainly, you know, we have our boundaries of what's acceptable, but I certainly wouldn't shut down a conversation without any follow-up at all. And we always do that as a matter of course. So we're over the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks, we've got some actual lesson time that we're dedicating because our curriculum isn't rigid. We can do that. And what I've chosen to do is I've asked for male teachers who have a pastoral background. There's also another teacher of wellbeing, which is what we call PSHE and RSA, who is male, and they're going to deliver this content. This is particularly because Andrew Tate and his supporters online are specifically saying, you know, your female teachers are going to tell you this in response to what I'm doing. And I certainly don't want to fall into that trap. So we've got some lessons to talk about why he's popular, why he is attracting so much publicity. But we're also, you know, very careful not to demonise him in totality. Now, Andrew Tate, and I thought it was really interesting that Matt referred to him as a groomer, and I really picked up on that, and it resonated with me because he is in many ways a groomer. So because you know for me to be able to teach or to provide the content for the male positive role model to then sort of deliver, I've done a lot of research about Tate, and what he does, just like a groomer, is he drops in the hate speech, the misogyny, amongst a whole lot of other content that is actually really positive, really appealing, things that you wouldn't want to disagree with, you know, things about boys aiming high, that they can do really well, that they can earn as much money as he's had, that, you know, they should reach for the stars. He also says a lot of positive things about women, believe it or not. He talks about women being very precious, how women are, I mean, slightly patronising, yes, but he talks about how women are princesses. He talks about his faith and his religion. And then, you know, the hate speech really is dropped in to that discourse.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm rambling.
Which I guess is more dangerous in the sense that it's sort of like, well, it's sort of some of it will be subtle, won't it? And sort of
it is, you know,
embedded into the content, let's say.
You know, and young men are very intelligent, and you know, I think if it was nothing but hate speech, they, you know, the vast majority of them would recognise it as you know, a no-go area, and that's not.
Well, that's why I was sort of the theme for me. One of my big questions tonight has been why, because as I said earlier, there's no way that every person who follows someone like this guy, there's millions of them, not all of them can sort of believe in, you know, I don't know, maybe they can all believe in some of this stuff, but I find it hard to believe. There must be some other things that they feel disenfranchised over, or he's tapping into things that they want to talk about.
There's a lot that's really appealing to them, and you know, because it's a safe space in wellbeing at my school, I ask the students, you know, like Charlotte said, I don't know what it's like to be a teenage boy or a teenage girl in 2023, but I'm surrounded by teenagers who can tell me. So, you know, I learn from them, and we open that up to debate. But certainly, do you know about the subscription to Hustlers University that this guy
I know it
pushes?
got shut down. Yeah.
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 So
I mean,
he
it's obviously there's a certain. Well,
yeah,
I don't know if we
and I
can
think
class them as criminal activities, but
no.
we possibly we could do probably, but they yeah, we need to be careful what we say they are and they
Yeah.
aren't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, like Hustlers University was about how he earned his money and
Yeah.
how he got notoriety, how he got success, and how that's achievable to everyone. And when he's sitting there with, the famous Bugattis and the Ferraris and everything else, and he's also, and maybe an unpopular opinion, but true, I think, to young men, is that he's very charismatic, he's very funny. And when we start to talk about Andrew Tate, some of the boys will sort of roll their eyes and sort of smile, because a lot of what he says is quite funny, and it's about talking to the students and saying to them, okay, so is anybody at all bad or all good? Because we aren't. We're all human beings.
Well, that's why I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on Tate. The only reason I've sort of looked up his stuff is for this show. And when I did, I was sort of not surprised, but a lot of what he does is so ridiculous that my question in my head was: is he actually doing this for that? Is he doing this? Is he almost playing that sort of like when he did that video the other week with Thunberg, when he's sort of smoking his cigar in his dressing room? I mean, there was something outlandishly silly about it that surely a person of his intelligence would know what he was doing. So
I think he absolutely does know what he's doing, and that's all part of the grooming, if you like, that Matt talked about. That because he's funny, because sometimes he's like a cartoon character, because sometimes he says positive things about women, it can be quite a confusing arena for the students to be in. And so by now in my school talking directly about Andrew Tate, and not just Andrew Tate, but so many other social media influencers like him, and there's a list longer than my arm, they're going to be seeing these videos. These videos are shared even if they don't follow them themselves, and being able to have that critical mind to decide, okay, why is this person doing this? What does this person get out of me following them or liking or sharing their video, and what's their real motivation in this? A large proportion of the money that Andrew Tate has earned has been through social media. He's making money from our young students, and then linking that also, he's very dangerously linked to the incel community. So for the students to be aware of what that is as well.
There's definitely a danger there underneath all of this. So definitely there is. There's elements of danger there. I mean, what Maggie, in terms of what do you think the role of assemblies can be? I mean, have you done any sort of big assemblies, and have you tried to tackle it in that way in your school?
I think assemblies are, and like Dr. Emily said, it's a lecture in effect. That's what the students have.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the best place to, because I always want discussion. So for me, I'm there to facilitate the discussion of the students. I want their opinions, I want them to debate it, and for me to offer them that safe space, that well-informed space, so that actually we can get some factual knowledge behind what they're doing. An assembly I'm not so keen on, because they're being talked at, and particularly when Tate and his supporters, if we use him as an example of misogynistic views, will say, this is what they're going to say. He says that, teachers are all part of the matrix and we're all in it together, and, it's kind of feeding into that. So I think, from my perspective, I would say for schools, and this is, I suppose the title of the show is What Can Schools Do? I would say become very well informed about who, the content before you go in and talk about him, because otherwise you can play into his hands. He knows
Yeah, absolutely.
that there's a election, Assemblies not great. However, we do have assemblies about wider topics such as discrimination. We have assemblies for, Black History Month. We have assemblies for disability awareness and so on. But it's part of the story rather than, okay, let's throw a tokenistic assembly at this and tick that box. That's something that really I have shied away from.
I'll just bring Matt in really again. Matt, if you're still there.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, do you think, based on, well, first of all, what do you think of what Maggie has said there? But also, do you think there's a case for not mentioning his name at all in school? Do you think there's actually a case for saying, right, let's talk about, I don't know, racism, misogyny, whatever the topics or issues are, and not bring his name in? Because, do you think that by bringing his name into it, you almost, well, like what Maggie said, you play into his hands?
Yeah. Firstly, Maggie, that was fascinating. It was really good to hear what you had to say on that. And certainly, it's made me. I'm actually doing a series of assemblies in a couple of weeks at my school, next week actually. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the students that I will be available in my classroom at lunchtimes on the day of that assembly if anybody wants to discuss. Right. So, in answer to your question, do we mention Tate? I think we do. I did a tweet yesterday or the day before that said, if you're going to approach this, I think your starting point is misogyny. Misogyny came before Tate. Tate is a symptom of misogyny. He's not the creator of it. I do think you have to mention Tate. I think there's this quite fallacious idea, this incorrect idea that if we mention taboo subjects, that the hearers of that language will automatically kind of take that behavior on. And this is in many areas. If you take the research into suicide, many people don't talk about suicide because they worry that the mention of the word suicide will make anybody listening to it potentially more at risk of suicide. And we know from the research that that's not the case. You can look at the way that Section 28 tried to suppress homosexuality in schools. And that was, I think, because people were worried that if you mentioned homosexuality, then everyone would become homosexual. And any homosexual person will tell you that you don't hear the word heterosexual and become straight all of a sudden. So, and I think it's the same with Tate. I don't think we have to worry that in talking about Andrew Tate, that all the boys that we teach are going to go off, be seduced by him. Now, of course, many boys will, but I think as Dr. Emily mentioned, I think that if you do mention Tate and you do open boys' awareness to him, boys who previously had not heard of him, and they go off, look him up and become interested in what he has to say, the issue, as Dr. Emily said, is there are underlying issues there.
Yeah.
All right. It's not the fact that the teacher said the word Tate that made these boys like Tate. There was already a pre-existing set of conditions or circumstances that have made them more susceptible to his charm or influence. Certainly in my assemblies, I'm going to be talking about misogyny. I'm going to be outlining very clearly behaviours and language that is acceptable and not acceptable. And Tate will feature, as will some other people, as a kind of an example of this misogyny. But certainly he won't be the focus.
Emily, if you're still there, I was going to ask you sort of, what are the things you definitely wouldn't say to boys/students about this? What are the things you would advise against doing, if there is anything?
And that was really interesting to listen to Matt there, because I'm totally of the view that bringing stuff out into the open is a good, well, what they say, disinfectant or whatever. It doesn't actually kind of push people in one direction or the other, just raising a topic. I think Yeah, I mean, what not to do? I think the style of engagement is important. I think just kind of turning around and saying, no, that's wrong. You're not meant to think and feel or believe that. Okay, I don't think that's going to work. It's either going to have zero effect, or it's going to, or it's going to potentially make the problem worse. I think. I also don't think holding Andrew Tate up as being this kind of boogeyman. I totally get, no, we don't all need to pretend he doesn't exist, but I think holding him up as this big thing and being like, look at this.
That's what he wants, isn't it?
That's exactly what he wants. Yeah. He'll then be pushing the narrative, look, everyone tells you not to listen to me. What's the thing? If we tell somebody, no, it's bad, it's dangerous, it makes them want to do it even more, right? It increases the attractiveness and the enticing kind of character that these people can have. I mean, think like I've mentioned porn already, haven't I? It's that sort of thing. If we tell kids not to do stuff, well, they're teenagers, that will make them want to do it more. And I think, countering stuff, because just because we don't want to tell people stuff is wrong and that's the end of the discussion doesn't mean that we don't want to challenge it. I think trying to do so through thinking about the context in which people are developing and experiencing their lives. So, for example, say with the false accusations of rape thing, what I've noticed teachers do is if a boy says something like that, they throw in a whole bunch of statistics to show that actually false accusations of rape aren't a big deal. Like, no, this doesn't really happen. Look, like this many percentage of rapes is false. You know what I mean? So and I don't think that works, right? I don't think we can meet what is often an expression of an emotion, like an anxiety or stress or confusion and uncertainty, like just going and saying, well, no, statistically that's not actually realistic. I don't know whether that's massively helpful. I think actually coming and saying, okay, right, because when I sit down and say talk to boys about those kinds of topics, false accusations, what you do and they can be very misogynistic and hostile.
It does interest me this, Emily. So you're saying that a lot of the boys you've talked to, that's been one of their biggest concerns is being falsely accused of sexual assault or rape or whatever.
Yeah, this is something that comes
really
up.
Sad, isn't it?
It's really sad, and do you know what? It's
and worrying.
It is worrying.
That's not necessarily their fault in a way that they, if they're scared of that, then the social media and other influences, obviously certain things have happened. I guess high profile things, but it's not just that. There must be other things at play. If people are. Boys are so stressed about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting to me when you actually start digging into, there's a whole bunch of anxiety that's like why they think this is a problem, but also what they even think a false accusation of rape is. Like, what does that actually mean to them? Because, some of these boys can be very sort of misogynistic, hostile. They're like, girls are liars, girls regret it. And then they, that they want to then just say it's rape just so that they don't get, I don't know, in trouble by their parents or something. So there can be hostility expressed, but also, though, a bit more nuance. So some of the boys I've spoken to have said things like, oh, well, I think false accusations happen where, like, the girl thinks that she was clear that she didn't want to do anything, and then you haven't really picked up on that, and then she turns around and says that you raped her. And I was like, oh, so you're not actually saying that she's lying then. It's those scenarios where, I don't know, breakdown of communication or whatever it might be that's gone on. And they were like, yeah, I mean, that's where most of this stuff happens, right? If the girl was feeling something and you didn't pick up on it, and then she turns around and says that you assaulted her. And I was like, oh, okay, so actually this terminology, false accusation of sexual violence, whatever, is being used to refer to all of these sorts of uncertainties and confusions that these boys are feeling in their sexual interactions, right? And I asked them about same-sex interactions, and I'm like, oh, do you think these false accusations, if we want to call them that, do we think that happens in gay relationships and encounters? And they were like, no, not really. And this is very heteronormative and stereotypical. This isn't that, I'm not endorsing what they're saying, but their view is, oh, well, like two guys together, how each other feels, like you can read body language and everything. With girls, we just don't have any idea what a girl's feeling, that we're different. So there's so many gender stereotypical heteronormative ideas sitting underneath these concerns. But actually, if you just throw a bunch of statistics at them about the likelihood of a false accusation, that doesn't really resolve any of those, what's really going on underneath the surface, right? So that's why I'm kind of thinking, no, we can't lecture our way out of this. There isn't facts-based solutions to these problems, right? We need to really be talking about, the social realities, the emotional realities of what this feels like. Because most boys I speak to, for all this stuff that Andrew Tate's putting up about masculinity, Most boys I speak to are not sexually active. They don't feel confident to even go and speak to a girl, let alone, all this performance of masculinity.
Emily, don't talk about me at the age of 14 publicly, please. It's very distasteful to discuss everything I shared about my teenage years with you in a public space.
I'm breaching your anonymity, your confidentiality here, yeah.
Yeah, but I think, everything you say, it's so interesting, really, really interesting. The final part of the show, because I've still got Matt, I've still got Emily, I've still got Maggie. I don't know how long I've got Matt for. Maybe we're going to end in 15 minutes anyway.
Yeah, I can stay to the end.
There you go. I've got Matt till 9. So in a minute, I'm going to ask you all to sort of close it off. And then I'm going to invite anyone else in the space, because we've got a load of we've had 50, 60, 70 people listening the whole way through. So welcome to anyone who's just joined us. If you want to listen back to this, it'll be available on the same link as a recording. So if you want to share it around with anyone you think it might be useful for, then please do. If you want to listen back to it as a podcast, we'll be publishing it through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all the main providers in the next sort of 24, 48 hours. So that it'll be there as well. So follow us on those. But what we're going to do for the last sort of 10, 15 minutes is, what are your tips for schools moving forward with this? Because I've seen briefings being printed. I've seen a lot of sort of panic, and I think that's going on again. I think we've got another wave of that. Matt mentioned that it started in August, September, and I think we were experiencing another wave of it. So in a minute, I'm going to ask all three of you in turn what your sort of tips for teachers and schools and people who work in classrooms is. Before we do that, one final shout for John Catt. If you haven't already looked at the pinned tweet at the top of the space, please check it out. They've got a whole range of new titles that they're just releasing at the moment, which I'm absolutely certain are going to be of interest to the listeners of this show. I'll give you one example of a book that's coming out very soon from them, which you can sort of get involved in and read. It's called Pretended Schools and Section 28 by Catherine Lee. I know that Genevieve Bent is going to be doing a TTR show, hosting a TTR show with Catherine very soon to talk about this book. But it looks and sounds like an incredibly important read. It's brand new. It's out now. It's called Pretended Schools and Section 28, Historical, Cultural and Personal Perspectives by Catherine Lee. If you want to find out more, visit johncattbookshop.com. Matt, I'll start with you. Tips for teachers and schools on this issue of Andrew Tate / misogyny / the future of teaching all this stuff.
Okay. So it was said earlier, but I think the first thing, there needs to be clear policy. I think just as there's a homophobia policy, a racism policy, I think schools, students, teachers and parents need to be educated as to exactly what constitutes inappropriate behaviour and language. The report by UK Feminista that's quite famous from 2017, I believe, shows that actually not a lot of teachers know what sexual harassment looks like. Is a wolf whistle sexual harassment? Is a drawing of a penis on a toilet wall, is that sexual harassment? Teachers don't know, so it's no wonder that the kids don't necessarily know. So I think there needs to be absolute clarity on actually what is acceptable, or certainly what is unacceptable. A lot of the research shows that actually boys really overestimate the extent to which other boys are sexist, and they underestimate the extent to which others are not. So I do think schools need to look at engineering a system where boys can discuss these things in an open forum that's carefully managed. And I do actually think that they'll find that actually not every boy is a sexist, a sexist pig, essentially.
Yeah.
And finally, I do think that if you are a misogynist, you're more likely to listen to another man. There's lots of research into this that shows that when a man calls another man out, sadly, misogynists are more likely to listen to them. However, what much of the advocates for men holding other men or boys holding other boys to account neglect is that actually, for many men and many boys, holding each other to account can be quite dangerous. On a literal level, it can be quite dangerous. If I see a group of football fans sexually harassing a woman on a tube train late at night and I'm on my own, the fact is that when I call that behaviour out, it could be threatening and it could put me in danger. And on a selfish level, where's my daughter then? The same can be said for boys on the playground. Also, socially, it can be quite dangerous. It can be very hard for a 14-year-old boy in a group chat on Snapchat or on the playground when one of his mates in the group says a sexist joke and all the other boys laugh. It can be very difficult for the boys to say, actually, lads, that's not fair. So I do think we need to I think boys certainly need to be told that they can hold each other to account, but we do need to, again, look at ways that boys can do this in a way that isn't dangerous, in a way that is effective, and in a way that doesn't leave them as these kind of social outcasts, devoid of any friendship groups. And again, I think a school which fosters a culture of talking or critiquing masculinity, having the kind of discussions that Maggie and the other speakers have been speaking about can really help with that.
Brilliant. Before I move on next to Emily, just to say that we've got 2 TTR shows tomorrow. So you better get... Oh, in fact, 3. What am I talking about? We've got 3. 11 a.m. You've got Graham Stanley all the way from Mexico City live at 11 a.m. till 12 midday. So listen to that. You can listen to that ttradio.org and just click listen live. At 7:30 p.m. tomorrow night, we've got the lovely Lucy talking with oh my goodness me, what's his name? Kieran Mackle something. Can't remember his surname, but anyway, Kieran is going to be talking with Lucy about maths mastery. 7:30 p.m. tomorrow. So if you're interested in students mastering maths, then definitely come here to TTR Twitter Spaces tomorrow evening, 7:30 p.m. Click the Teachers Talk Radio bio icon and it'll take you straight through to Lucy's show. So enjoy that tomorrow evening. And then at 9 p.m, straight after Lucy, tomorrow evening, debut show. Natalie, who's in the space, will be live on Teachers Talk Radio, 9 p.m. tomorrow evening. So make sure you listen into that. And I think off the top of my head, she's talking about the importance of the arts in the curriculum, the importance of bringing in sort of the creativity into the curriculum, which is obviously incredibly important. So that's from 9 p.m. tomorrow. Again, ttradio.org, and then click listen live to listen to that. So you've got loads to look forward to tomorrow. My goodness me. Emily, tips for schools and teachers on Tate and misogyny.
Yeah, sure. And I agree with everything that Matt just said there, particularly around the idea of kind of bystander intervention and what actually feels safe and possible, and giving young people, girls and boys, the tools that actually feel they can use it with the realities of their kind of peer dynamics and so on. I think the only thing I'd add is, this is a really complex systemic kind of social problem, right? And I think schools actually are being asked to resolve quite a lot of issues, okay? And there's a lot of them pressure and responsibility being placed on these schools, and but they are kind of microcosms almost, aren't they? And they can become a place for practicing something new. We're talking about young people here, aren't we? I think what maybe staff and teachers and that in schools want to do is keep talking to each other and learning about the nature of the problem and what's sitting underneath it. I think what's been really interesting about tonight's conversation is we've all kind of told stories of things we've heard from boys and insights that we've developed through kind of trying to figure this out with young people. And then you start to just learn more and more about what's going on underneath the surface. So I think carrying on talking insights that you got in a lesson with some boys, okay, well, that's something that we figured out, let's share it, and maybe we need to take this approach. So seeing it as something that kind of staff have to come together and figure out what the cause of the problem is for their actual unique local pupil population or whatever, and not feel right it's all got to be resolved in one lesson or one conversation, because it's not going to happen. It's a live, dynamic, ongoing thing, right? And the more I think that the adults, the teachers, can be engaging with each other about what they're picking up on, the better. It's strengthening those insights, right?
Yeah, brilliant, amazing. Blooming heck, you two, Matt and Emily, bloody hell. I mean, I can't compete with your level of answers on this. It's absolutely amazing. Maggie, final opportunity, Maggie. Tips and suggestions and advice that you would give to schools and teachers on the teaching of Andrew Tate / misogyny. Need to unmute yourself, bottom left, Maggie. Oh, is Maggie still there? Am I still there? Is anyone still there? Well, while we're waiting for Maggie, if anyone else wants to call in, then at this point, to sort of share what you think schools should be doing, what you think teachers could or should be doing on this issue, then feel free to do so. We've only got about 5 minutes left. So if you want to sort of get involved now, all you have to do, there's a little icon in the bottom left-hand side, little blue mic icon. You can click that and you can request to speak and say something. Brent, our fellow TTR host, has requested, so we'll bring him in. Brent, really, hopefully succinctly, because we've only got a few minutes left. Oh, it's still saying connecting. If anybody else wants to call in while we're waiting for Brent's hamsters to turn around the wheel in his living room to connect his Wi-Fi, then feel free to click the little icon in the bottom left-hand side, the little mic on icon. Click that. And while we're doing that, this is my opportunity to say thanks for our regular listeners. People like Mrs. Lloyd, people like Sam Edwards, who's always listening to TTR. Thank you very much, Sam Edwards, for always listening. Tolu, on Wednesday night, has her debut space. She's in the space now. Wednesday evening, 7:30 p.m. You've got a space tonight. You've got a space tomorrow. You've got a space on Wednesday, Monday to Wednesday this week. So that's really something to look forward to. I'll just check if Maggie's still there. Maggie, have you unmuted yourself, bottom left? Because I was hoping to hear from your sort of final thoughts on things, if you're still there. Brent, you've connected. The hamsters have turned the wheel, and you're with us.
Hiya, Tom. Yeah, very quickly. This is just something that's been bugging me for a couple of years in school. And I want just to open out to how everybody else feels about it. I find myself constantly trying to sort of stop the misogynistic behaviour from a lot of the young lads towards my female colleagues. And maybe it's the old-fashioned gentleman in me, but I do often find myself sometimes stepping in and thinking they're talking to me differently to how they're talking to some of my female colleagues. And it's made me sort of think of where is that coming from, how they treat people differently. And again, in schools. And I think I find myself sometimes having to take a step back and say, well, I actually go in and interfere. It's that kind of old-fashioned dad's the disciplinarian kind of thing. And I often find it's a bit unfortunate. I don't get the behavior problems that some of my female colleagues get. And it's not that they can't do discipline. I just think some of our boys just don't listen and don't respect. And I think that's some of the old-fashioned views coming in from home. And I've seen situations where, some of the gentlemen, I've had to step in some parents' evenings and actually, as a union rep, and say, I'm sorry, that conversation's finished, because the way that some of the fathers have spoken to some of my colleagues, I felt was, no, I'm not having that. And I have to ask myself that question of, they wouldn't speak to me like that. Why are they speaking to my colleague like that? And I think the profession needs a little bit of work on that, about making sure that, there is equality and that teachers are treated equally and equally within, I think, that's what I want to put this out there, whether that's just what the current setting that I am, or whether that's a bit of an endemic issue that we have across the whole profession. So I just thought I'd throw that in there to see, is there what people think about that?
Well, we don't actually have time to find out. But one thing I will try to do is bring Maggie in for her final words. Maggie, are you there again?
Hi, Tom. I'm so glad I managed to get back on. I lost connection.
No worries. You've got about 3 minutes to sort of give your final tips, suggestions, advice for schools and teachers on the issue of misogyny / Andrew Tate.
Okay, that's fantastic. So I think, first of all, I would say, really invest in a strong PSHE and RSE curriculum. And I don't just mean in terms of money, in terms of training, in terms of time on the timetable, so that these conversations are ongoing and they're not reactionary. So with my curriculum at my school, we obviously we cover all the statutory requirements, but we've got time to go beyond and above that and make sure that the conversations about misogyny, discrimination, racism, and much more besides are constantly part of learning. Secondly, what I would say is, and something that we didn't pick on very much, is that encourage girls to be part of this conversation as well. Yes, Andrew Tate is aiming his content at boys, but it's a lot of it is about women and it's about girls. So empower their voices, and as peers and classmates within the classroom, that can be really powerful. Actually, how does it make the girls feel in the room? How does it make women feel? How would it make the students' mums or aunts or grandmothers feel? And sort of really bring it into focus like that. And I think finally, it's really important that we empower our teachers and empower our parents by providing them opportunities to read particular articles that we may have found that have been really interesting, really informative, listen to shows like this today to hear a whole range of perspectives. I know I've certainly learned a lot from Matt and Dr. Emily and Charlotte, and I want to say thank you. And just to keep that conversation going as a community, so that individuals like Andrew Tate really don't have the power that they really think they have.
Maggie, it's been an absolute pleasure. I just want to give a special thanks to Emma, to Maggie. I don't know who that is or what that is. It sounds like we've got a special alien joining us as well. Who knows? But a massive thanks to Maggie, to Matt Pinkett, to Emily Setti, and to everyone else who has contributed. Charlotte, who was on earlier on. And thank you ever so much to everyone who has listened today and engaged in the conversation, which I think has been a really important one. We'll be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. with Graham Stanley on TTR. Rest easy and have a good day tomorrow, and speak to you all soon. Good night.